Welcome to episode 83 of Rubbish Talk with me, Alasdair.
Me, Jane Bond.
And this week we are going to chat all things about the tip, or the dump, or officially the Household Waste Recycling Centre.
It used to be called the CA site, didn't it, as well?
I don't know what the Civic Community Site.
Yeah.
Civic Community
Yeah,
Site.
it's all sorts of words.
So it's got various names: dump, tip, CA site, Civic Community Site, or officially we're meant to call it the Household Waste Recycling Centre, or the Household Waste Recovery Centre, depending on how you want to approach it. There we go. So anyway, first of all, apologies. We mentioned Deborah Sachs last week, and I think it was me. I never actually went back and checked, but we called her Saxton rather than Sachs. So only defence is I do actually know a Russell Saxton who used to work for Kelda Water, but I've not talked to him for ages. So he may no longer be there. So it's not really a defence, but that's what I'm sticking to. So apologies to Deborah there. And we're recording this a week early. So hot off the news, or over a week early, is the fact that landfill ban in Scotland has been effectively pushed into touch for 2 years.
Yeah.
So there's going to be what they've called, so SEPA's issued a temporary enforcement approach. So they've issued a temporary regulatory position statement. So basically, if you are an operator and you need to take waste to landfill, you apply to SEPA for a 6-month period. You provide evidence that you've tried to find a waste to energy home. And if you've still not been successful, you're allowed to apply. That does you for 6 months. At the end of 6 months, if you still need it, you need to apply for another 6 months, and so on. So you effectively are going to need, if you're going to need right up to the end. So they've done this for 2 years. So potentially operators will need 4 of these 6-month extensions. And I think the bit that's missing the clarity, partly probably because I've not read it totally, but it's how much evidence is going to need to be provided to SEPA for them to make that case. So I feel a bit sorry for SEPA here, because all the hard work in terms of assessing these cases is going to land on them.
I just think I don't know, everything gets, kicked down the park, doesn't it, basically? We decide on these things, and then nothing gets put into place to actually support everything. And then by the time you get to the actual date, it's like, oh, sorry, we can't do it. Oh, it's okay, no worries. We'll give you another 2 years. We're at DRS, this is the second time, or is it the third time the landfill ban's been pushed?
This will be the second time.
Are you sure?
Second time.
Yeah.
But I think they were in a pretty unenviable position that if they did go ahead with the ban, a lot of waste was going to have to go south of the border.
Yeah, I can see the point, but I mean, to be fair, there's been, when was it first? 10 years ago.
At least. It's more than that. It's more than that.
I mean, how long do you need? Anyway, sorry, that's just my personal opinion.
I'm sure by the time this goes out, so as I said, we have recorded this early, but by the time this goes out, there will be much more gossip and intrigue about it. So we'll catch that up on the next episode.
Yeah, so I've got one here which is looking at serious waste crime, and apparently there's been a report from the House of Lords. So all them posh people sitting in the House of Lords have produced a report and realised that efforts to tackle serious waste crime have been critically under-prioritised. So there was this big report. I mean, it's kind of obvious stuff, but when it actually gets raised up in the House of Lords, perhaps somebody might actually take notice of it. And it's been dubbed the new narcotics. There you go.
We've known that for a long time.
Well, yeah, it's just a drug. We call waste a drug. So apparently Baroness Sheehan said members of the public had reported the activity, but nothing was being done. And this was to do with the dumping of more than 30,000 tonnes of household and construction waste at Hodeswood and 6 other illegal sites. So they're saying that the Environment Agency, police and local authorities are at fault, saying it's not a high enough priority. It's probably not really very sexy, is it? Catching people who dump rubbish rather than racing around facing, drug barons. I don't know. Now, perhaps that's being a bit facetious. But I think it's always been like that, where there's muck, there's brass, isn't it? And it's the same thing. So yes, so apparently the report concluded that over 38 million tonnes of waste is believed to be illegally managed at some point each year, enough to fill the 90,000-seat Wembley Stadium 35 times. Now, we've talked about this before, haven't we? The fact that you actually cost money. People actually save money by putting it in a legal site. They might get caught, but the fines aren't as great as they would have made from actually dumping the rubbish in the wrong place.
The actual letter, the House of Lords letter that was sent, is well worth a read. It's pretty scathing in terms of it runs to about, I can't remember, about 10 pages, but some of the there's paragraphs, specific examples of the failure of the Environment Agency to, 1, pursue repeated reports of serious waste crime, just what you're talking about, Jane, effectively utilise the powers available to stop the mass illegal dumping of waste, and 3, to bring effective, timely and successful prosecutions against the perpetrators of serious organised crime. So they're quite, they're not pulling the punches. And then there was a bit about, we are unimpressed with the lack of interest shown by the police in fulfilling their role by bringing to bear their expertise. And I think this is the thing. I think a lot of people think fly tipping's not really a crime, but at the end of the day, there's often lots and lots of money involved behind it, which is why they're saying it's the new narcotics, because there's so much money to be saved. If you've got a 10-ton load, there's a good lot of money to be saved in the back of illegally disposing that. So they reckoned on the report, it cost the English economy in the region of $1 billion every year. And they highlight that each pound spent on fighting waste crime could generate £5 in benefit. And they also never pulled any punches about HMRC. And they basically finalised by saying landfill tax fraud has been effectively decriminalised, as in they're not enforcing it properly.
Yeah, it says no one has ever been convicted of landfill tax fraud, despite there being a tax gap, the difference between what is paid and theoretically owed. And you kind of see how, we're having to pay loads and loads more tax, and tax on pensions, tax on this, tax on the other. Perhaps they got their finger out and caught some of these illegal waste people and charged them landfill tax, and we wouldn't have that problem. I'm worried about my pension now.
Anyway, a good letter from the House of Lords. What happens next, I am not sure, but watch this space and we'll keep you updated.
And we did talk about it briefly last time, didn't we? About the National Litter Fly Tipping Strategy.
For Scotland.
For Scotland, and we kind of vaguely said, yes, it's there, but we haven't read it. Well, we've gone through it in a bit more detail, to be fair, and there are some positives that have come out of this, particularly from SEPA's perspective. So there was quite a lot of areas where they were going to do actions that we're going to take. So there's talk about an action plan, there's an update on progress, and some of the leads are Keep Scotland Beautiful, quite a lot of Keep Scotland Beautiful, Zero Waste Scotland, Scottish Government, and some based around SEPA. So number 10 on the actions was trialling of a model related to fly tipping with the new enforcement approach model. So apparently it's a new enforcement approach, and they were going to try this model over the last 12 months. And SEPA has served 6 variable monetary penalties on offenders, totaling over 21,000 in penalties and over 6,000 in costs. So that's £27,000 around the variable monetary penalties. So that's quite a good positive. So keep that up. And I think that was just around local authorities. So if we extend that, that's quite important. And number 13, unlucky for some, was using digital technology to detect and disrupt fly tippers. So again, we're linking back here. Good link here back to the House of Lords. So it's using digital interventions to deter and disrupt unregistered waste carriers advertising online. So we've got identification profiles, so like Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, and they identified 300 profiles, and 51% of that had no registration, so no waste carriers license in place. Closed 32 profiles on the basis that they were operating illegally. They issued over 7 fixed monetary penalties issued, totaling over 2,000. So there's quite there's quite a few things that have been done, which is quite important.
That ties back to episode 82 I did with Amanda Young, and she was saying the sort of lack of service availability to the public to take bulky waste away from the house was driving people to use some of these, man with van and all that type of stuff. So if you've not had a listen to that one, certainly have a listen. So in terms of that strategy, year 2 update, year 3 action plan, I did go through it in quite a bit of detail. That was the only bits I thought were remotely interesting. A lot of it I thought was just waffle. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I probably could have read the same thing in a plan that was done 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and so on. I think much more consistency with this sort of stuff, much more sharing this type of information. That's what's going on. Not just SEPA, from every council across the country would we're still at the stage where, if I go out running someplace and I don't know, Dumfries and Galloway or Fife or whatever, there's not a single point of contact I can phone to report fly tipping or things. We used to have the dumb dumpers. We no longer have that. In this day and age, we should have a simple, easy way to report things like that everybody buys into. But that's maybe a wish too far. And it was maybe in there someplace, but it's hidden behind, strategy wording, if you like. So, anyway. And lastly, the one I've been keeping a little bit of an eye on, it's sort of hit the news and then disappeared from the news, is the court case between Biffa and the Scottish Government about that abandoned deposit return scheme. Was ongoing last week. I think it had 2 weeks to run, so I've not seen anything recently. It flicks up and down. I did try and search for more information about it. And Biffa's presenting their evidence, obviously the Scottish Government is as well. So watch this space. We might do a bit more on that.
Yeah, be interesting to hear. Perhaps be a fly on the wall in that argument.
I'm sure we could get a transcript from someone if we're really enthusiastic. I'm sure some of our listeners probably have access to the transcript already, but we'll keep an eye out. We'll keep an eye out.
Okay, so, fair enough.
I think that's us for news. I think that was lots of news. Landfill ban. My plan had been to say we're 2 months away from the ban coming in force and we know nothing, but we do know nothing now about the landfill bans. So that's at least
there is no landfill ban.
At least one step forward.
2 years.
So, as we said at the start, we're going to talk about household waste recycling centres, or HWRC, in terms of size. So for people that don't know, they are actually legally required by law. A council must provide them. Doesn't mean they've got to provide one really close to their house. It's just they've got to provide one in your area. But they're actually quite contentious and difficult sites to run. You've got to maintain public access to them. You've got public bringing in a huge variety of different waste streams to it. You've got to make sure you've got capacity for all these waste streams. You've got to service these waste streams, and you've got to try and do that in a safe manner. We're just going to chat through what some of the issues are. And I think the other thing is most councils get pretty good recycling rates from their HWRC sites. And generally, the more space they have and the more capacity they have, the more they can segregate waste out and the better the recycling rates they can achieve.
Yeah. So why do they exist? I mean, what's the purpose of them? Well, Alasdair's already said that they're legally required, and actually it's the Environment Protection Act 1990. Very important piece of legislation. Anybody who's ever been to any of the courses that I give will know that is one of my favourite pieces of ancient history. So 1990, every local authority has a legal duty to provide facilities where households can dispose of household waste free of charge. So it's free. So you don't have, the key word to that is householders. So it's free to householders. So, if you're a business or a commercial business or whatever, then, you should be paying to get rid of your waste. But if you're a householder, that's fine. So they're separate from your curbside collection. So this means that it's somewhere where you can go yourself. So if you're cleaning your shed out, or you're sorting out your garden and you can't fit it all in your bin, or you've got all that, you've decided you want to get a new telly or whatever, or your lawnmower's broken down, you can chuck that in the back of your car and take it to the tip. Sorry, household waste recycling site. And when you get there, there's all sorts of things to put your whatever you've got in. So you can take anything you want, but not everything can be recycled and might not have a space for everything. One of the things that is really an issue and they don't like are tyres. So often you don't get tyres accepted at household waste recycling centres because they're very difficult to get rid of. But it can meet national recycling targets. So Alasdair said that before. Most areas that have got high waste recycling targets or figures actually have really good high performing household waste recycling centres, and they could be, I don't know, 40% of all local recycling. But you've got all sorts of designs and types and sizes. We're sort of going to go through a bit of that as well, is why some work and why some don't.
I think the summary is, in the past, household waste recycling centre sites were, they probably had a residual waste skip, and then they maybe had glass, they maybe had cardboard, they maybe only had 2 or 3 options. Now I know the local South Ayrshire Council recycling site has got multiple, there's probably, thinking off the top of my head, 15, 16 different waste types, waste streams that can go through that. Ranging from, residual waste still, but there'll be a cardboard bay, there'll be a green garden waste bay, and this is one of the ones I remember way back doing a course, and one of the operators gave me the example of, they had a garden waste bay or skip, and he walked up one day, and on top of the skip was a child's slide, and he approached the person that put it in there, and he said, well, why you put that in the garden waste skip? And he said, well, it was out the garden. So
fair enough.
You can't sort of account. So I think in terms of signage and descriptions and stuff, you do have to, what we understand as garden waste is garden waste, shrubs, bushes, grass cuttings that you would then turn into compost. And I think that's sometimes a bit lost in people. So
lost in translation doesn't mean your slides or your shovels and your spades and your trowels.
So potentially, as well as the sort of regular, your cardboard, your plastics, your residual waste, your metal, your garden waste, there will often be hazardous waste streams. So that'll be potential hazardous is the type of containers in, so things like compressed gas bottles, your fridges, freezers, because of CFCs, as we talked about in the previous episode, waste electrical and electronic equipment, so quite often they'll have areas for large waste electrical equipment and they'll have areas for small. You might, if you're lucky, have batteries, you'll probably have textiles. One of the contentious ones is cement bonded asbestos sheeting. Quite a lot of councils don't like to have that on their site, but then that provides a bit of a disposal challenge for householders in terms of where they're going to get it disposed. But because of that, they're actually quite, in terms of licence and permits, they will be licensed as a HWRC site, but there will be a requirement to accept hazardous waste on the site or remove hazardous waste off the site, because effectively household waste is never classified as hazardous, even if once it gets onto site. Things like asbestos, if the member of the public brings it onto site, when they bring it on site, it's non-hazardous. When it lands in the site, it then becomes hazardous waste, and the council's got to deal with that as hazardous waste. And that's one of the sort of little quirks in the system. So you've got permitting issues. The biggie for the operation of the site is vehicle traffic flows. So if you've got public vehicles mingling with service vehicles, removing skips, that's generally not a good idea. So in that scenario, a council would probably close the doors, close the site gates, which can cause a bit of contention with the public if they're getting stopped from getting access while a service vehicle loads a skip. The better designed sites will have a high and low access, so the public will go up high and the service vehicles will go down low, and it'll be segregated out. And then you just get basic things like, how do you run a 7-day operation? Generally, they'll be busier at the weekend and during the week. do you need them open during the week, or can you open them just in the afternoon? All that type of stuff that, you know, councils sort of struggle with. So they're not particularly easy places to organise. And although the operators, everybody moans that the operators don't do much, it's actually quite a tricky job dealing with the public and trying to get them to do the right thing and use the right containers.
Yeah, and I suppose that comes into how do you make it easier for yourself and the operator when you go to a waste recycling centre, because you'll know, or you should know, that when you go to these waste recycling centres, there's loads of different containers for all sorts of different things. And I know from going to the one that is nearest to me, you go in and you think, I have no idea where to put anything. Where do I park? Because if I park here, then I've got this type of waste. I've got some of this, and then I've also got all this wood, which is right over the other side, but I don't want to carry it all that way, so I'm going to have to drive round and park again. So it's all quite it can be quite a challenge when you're going in, from a member of the public, like I am as well, then it can be quite confusing. So a lot of the time it's easy to have it segregated. So you've got your waste type segregated before you arrive. So you've got a pile of glass, you've got a pile of wood, you've got sort of general waste that you're going to chuck in the general waste skip. So you've got all of these things. It's easy to say, but it's a bit harder to do when you're throwing everything in the back of the car. So it's trying to segregate that and think about where you're going to put them. If you've been to that site before, then you'll probably know how it works.
Have you been to that site before? You park your car in reverse order from what you're going to go in, and then the challenge will be you'll not be able to get parked where you think you're going to get parked.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. I do think that's a problem because now
is that why people get upset? Is that why people get all grumpy at them?
Oh, I think so, because you go in and you're thinking, where do I go first? Where do I stop? Where do I park? How do I reverse in when there's not really that much space? And I think it's what are you expecting to put into that site? Do you know that if you do put tyres in the back of your car, are they going to take them? What about plasterboard? What about batteries? If you've got a car battery, are they going to take that car battery? Or what about oil? Do they accept oil? Because some of these sites don't. So again, it's actually identifying what they do and what they don't. Again, when we were talking about earlier, the commercial operators, they shouldn't be on the site. I remember I had a big sofa to get rid of, and I borrowed the Albion van. Don't tell my boss though.
And you were chased, were you? I hope you were chased.
I borrowed the Albion van to get rid of my sofa, and they did look at me, and when I said to them, where would you like me to put this? They didn't ask me if it had got pops or anything like that. They just said, oh, just chuck it in that thing over there. And I'm looking at it thinking, come on, mate, you can give us a hand. Unfortunately, it was a nice guy on that day and he gave me a hand. But again,
Well, that's the other thing that public don't understand. There's lots of HWRC sites where the staff are not allowed to help, and they're not allowed to help because they've had various claims against them that they've damaged the vehicles and all this sort of stuff. So you often get into this sort of catch-22 where it's like, why can that man not help me out with this rubbish? And especially with somebody elderly. But sometimes they're specifically told not to because they've had experience where people have claimed them. I get caught with it all the time. The only times I go to the HWRC is really when I cut my hedge. I've mastered it this year. I've only had to cut my big hedge twice this year. Normally I have to do it 3 times, so that was a success. But I put the hedge trimmings into these ton bags, and the problem is I can load them up quite heavy and get them into my van at the house. But see, trying to lift them up on top of the wall to get them tipped out without putting the bag into the garden waste, that's a real challenge. So I've learned that rather than loading in 3 bags, I actually load 6 bags, and they're just not as full. So it's a lot easier for me to empty out.
Yeah.
So it's things like that people need to think about that.
And I think you do expect, quite a lot of the time you do expect people to help. And when they're sitting in the cabin kind of having their cup of tea and having a chit chat with their mate and you're struggling with your big bags or whatever and they don't even bother coming out, you are thinking, excuse me, can you help? But I suppose there's that balance, isn't there? where, it's the expectation versus what they can actually do.
Yeah.
So
If they're not allowed to help, your best bet is to get a fellow user to help you, because generally people, if they're bringing
they
stuff,
will help.
they'll generally help you. But the
Yeah.
signage is really important in terms of, and I know Zero Waste Scotland did loads of work about this, probably 10 years ago, trying to get consistent signage around the country. But over time, that gets damaged and stuff. And I think, certainly the air site, which is good and it's quite well signaged, there is still, I was wondering about, I think it was a toaster or a kettle, try to find the waste electrical, the small waste electrical. I couldn't find it. And I was back and forward. And I was like, I know it's here someplace. And I couldn't find the right container. So things like that, just getting the signage a wee bit improved and stuff gets damaged, stuff gets moved.
Yeah, I think as well is that you've got your traffic and that traffic balance as well, because a lot of the sites weren't designed for 26 different types of materials coming in, and when you're coming in, like I say, you're coming in, you're trying to park, you're trying to move stuff, people are walking across the areas and everything like that. It is, sometimes you look at it and you think it's an accident waiting to happen, and that's one of the biggest things, isn't it, from recycling centres and everything like that, is vehicle accidents, because there's so many things happening on the site. So
when I used to serve, my previous job, I used to run the vehicle that was servicing council HWRC sites, and the challenge we had was the disposal sites closed at lunchtime on a Saturday, so we could lift a skip at, we had to lift it at 11 o'clock, go up and tip it, bring it back, put it in there at 12 o'clock. And by 2 o'clock on the Saturday afternoon, that skip could be full again.
Yeah,
and
I guess Saturdays are just
that site was open till Monday morning.
Yeah.
And then you got all the public turning up saying, and that was a real issue in terms of capacity. So it's not as easy as people think. Yes, you can put drivers on at weekends to service things, but if the sites aren't open to get disposal, then you've got a real problem. So yeah, so one of the things that councils did, and this was probably COVID forced this through for a lot of people, is councils put in booking systems where before you turned up at site, you had to use a booking system. I probably was a bit not really sure about it, but South Ayrshire Council's got a booking system in. I think it's great. I do a wee bit of planning ahead in my head as to when I'm going to get the damn hedge cut. And then I think I can get up the HWRCs near the gym, so quite often I'll nip into the HWC and then go to the gym. When you turn up, there's only going to be half a dozen cars in there because they're all booked in, and you get your space. It cuts down in the sort of Saturday morning, big long queues. You used to go up there when, if you went in there on a Saturday, Sunday or a bank holiday, you'd be queued out to the roundabout. You wouldn't know how long you'd be waiting before you actually got in and out. So to me, you do need to be a bit organised. In terms of councils, the benefit is they can staff better, so they can look at where the peak bookings are. They can reduce staff if there's not a lot of bookings. Finally, it cuts down the amount of abuse staff are getting because people aren't queuing for a long time. It's much more straightforward. It avoids what you were saying there, Jen, the guys sitting in the hut because they've got to stand at the door and let you in. And basically it provides councils a lot of data as to who's using sites, because in the past, what would happen was commercials were basically coming in their cars and abusing the system. So by booking and having a tie in the registration, they can see how often people are in and so on. But one of the things I was going to talk about earlier on, Jane, you mentioned commercial waste not being allowed. Some councils do allow it, but they've got to pay for it.
Yeah.
So they're allowed to use the same service. And that's fine. And it's a valid disposal route for commercial contractors. So I think it's important, if we want to be serious about cutting down fly tipping, we don't want to say at HWRCs you cannot use it, because then, it's cutting down the options, the joiners, the plumbers and all the rest stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I think you're going to be negative about this, Jane. You're going to say that rubbish.
No, I'm playing devil's advocate here. Actually, to be honest, I quite like the idea. But anyway, there's a few things. You've got to book online. So if you haven't got access to online booking system, or you're not quite as digitally able. Is that a word? Yeah,
I think you just
able
made that word
digitally,
up.
digitally able. Then perhaps it means that you can't go and get your slot and all that sort of stuff. Older residents, for example, or people who haven't got computers. Although I don't think there's very many. If you haven't got a computer, you've got a phone. The other one is I pay my council tax, so I should go whenever I want to. Therefore I don't need permission to visit. I should just be able to go. It's like, well, yeah, good point, but let's we go through the positive reasons why we need it. And then there's the other one. Well, if I have to book, I just want to go when I want to go. And if it's not open and I can't get in, I'm just going to chuck it outside. Yeah, right. So, is there more fly tipping? I mean, to be honest, when we were in lockdown, the amount of fly tipping, why on earth anybody would decide that the household waste recycling centres were open to go and go so you could go and put your sofa in them. I really don't know. You should have checked first and known what you were going to do. And if you had taken it all away there, why chuck your sofa then on the side of the road? Why not just take it back? So anyway, that's my rant. And, people decide they want to clean up their lofts and they want to get rid of it that day, and there's no other day to do it. So, I mean, people are just a bit impatient, to be fair,
I always say it's their waste, Jane. They've created it.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to organise yourselves, not anybody else's.
Responsibility. But I do know from previously managing HWRC sites, you do get people that will come to a recycling site every single day, and they're not particularly there to dispose of things. They're there to find any valuable items that you may have. So it's probably not as common now as it used to be, but it's still certainly a possibility. And one of the other real benefits to a booking system that's probably kept quiet by the councils is, in the past, it was actually really difficult for them to close a site for training, for maintenance, for anything, because it always needed adverts and papers and all that sort of stuff. But what they can now do, if they've got a booking system, is they can effectively just block out a period of time and book it for themselves, and the public never know, but they can get their training done in a couple of hours at lunchtime, or they can do their maintenance or whatever it is they need to do. So it's made it a lot more flexible for councils. So certainly, I know talking to South Ayrshire, they like it. It really suits, and it's not caused any great. It's basically just spreading the workload across the day, rather than in some cases it be the end of the day or a Saturday and Sunday. I think if you've not got a booking system, I think it can help really manage the site a lot better than maybe it's been managed at the moment.
I think the thing is, a lot of the time as well, there's just such public pressure to keep them with no booking system. People start a booking system, people don't like it, they shout loud and make a big fuss, stamp their feet, and the politicians jump on the bandwagon and go, oh yeah, look, I'm fantastic, I've stopped that booking system, vote for me. Whereas actually they're not thinking about the health and safety implications, or the staffing implications, or the traffic implications, or anything like that. They're just thinking, I'll get some votes. It's like, yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm going to rant.
No, there's so many sites we know, HWRC sites, where the minute there's more than a couple of vehicles, they're queuing in an A-class road.
Yeah.
They're queuing in a flash road, and they're basically putting themselves at risk by queuing in a fast-moving road. That needs to be taken into account when you're running these sites.
Yeah, I mean, the vehicle movement is one of the biggest risks. And I think also when you're working on one of these sites, I mean, I've done, been on quite a number of sites from a working point of view. And some of the stories you get told by the operators about the abuse and violence towards staff is shocking. And they get shouted at, sworn at, threatened, physically assaulted, just because Joe Bloggs can't put his waste in the right place at the right time, and he's not put himself on the booking system. So and there's a lot of them have been, there is CCTV in some of them. Some of them have body cameras as well now, because it has got to a point where people have been threatened daily. And it's, you don't go to work to be threatened, do you? I don't suppose they get danger money to work at these household waste recycling centres. So
it's really sad that they get threatened and stuff, and it's really
for just trying to do your job.
Yeah. I vividly remember doing a training course. I'll not mention the local authority. I'm sure this guy must be retired by now, but I was doing a training course for operators of these sites, and we were talking about violence, aggression, and this man would have a fight in a dark room all by himself. You could just sense it off him. So him and his big pal were the two that ran the site, and the big guy was the calmest guy in the world. Course progressed, this wee small operator who was always in fighting mode started reeling off these stories about people threatening him and he'd been punched and be this. And as at lunchtime, I went and had a wee quiet word with the big guy and said, what's going on there? And he says, oh, it's just the way how Jimmy approaches them. He's always in fighting mode. I'm fine with them all. And I just spent a lot of time with this guy trying to get him. It was just got in his head. It was a battle and he was going to win, and he was never going to win. Whereas his big partner just took a different approach to it. So there is, I think, a little bit about aggression. Switch did a violence and aggression video, and there is actually resources on the Switch website if anybody's not seen them. That maybe for council social media and stuff, it's well worth a share. It's free to share, just to highlight. So in the video are Falkirk Council operatives who were violently attacked at sites by customers, and they did a sort of reenactment of that. So if anybody's interested.
It's just, I do find as well, having done quite a bit of training, is that site operators don't necessarily get training on how to manage and how to deal with customer relationships and, violence and aggression in the workplace and things like that, or how to approach it, how to manage it, what to do, which again is important.
Yeah. And it's back to what I was saying, there's lots of misunderstanding. There's, people don't understand some of the waste types have got hazardous, the batteries, the fluorescent light tubes with the mercury in them, the sofas, needing the sofas in a separate container or the chairs in a separate container because of persistent organic pollutants. That's not the operator's fault. It's not even the council's fault. That's, national regulations. Splitting out plasterboard because it's banned from going to landfill because it produces hydrogen sulfide. Again, that's not the council's fault. That's the law. Really, we could, if everybody put a bit of thought. We've done, myself and Eugene have done bulky residual waste audits. Of that bulky waste, and there's a hell of a recycler in there that should be split out.
Yeah.
And it's probably not even recycle it. It's probably stuff that should be going for reuse. It should be.
Yeah. I mean, just one site that I was doing some work on, it came through loads of toys all boxed up, just being thrown into the residual, not even taken to a charity shop or anything like that. Clothes, again, all nicely packaged up with their labels on and everything. When we've been talking about waste hierarchy, and this is you're throwing it in a black bag into a skip. That is the last bit of the waste hierarchy. There should be the reuse, the recovery, and all that sort of stuff first. And it's just I don't know, kind of thinking about it, because they are.
I think
yeah.
I was going to say, Jane, that they're good as most HWRCs, as we've talked about, got really high recycling rates.
Yes.
What we've probably not got nearly good enough yet is good reuse rates, and that's probably if we're looking at.
I would say that.
If we're looking
I'm just going to say this. I remember I was used to work for Shropshire County Council, and on our sites we used to have tofters, and they'd pay a fee to be there. And basically, what they did was take things out that they thought could be reused, or recovered, or mended, or whatever. And at the time, I didn't even think about it. But now you think, well, actually, that was brilliant, because they they sold it on, but they still had to pay a fee to actually be on the site itself. So it does make...
The official version of that now is the reuse shops.
Oh, of course.
And I know the likes of FCC. We did one with Gordon Fergus a long time ago. He'd done a lot of work with FCC. I'm sure it was FCC. If it wasn't FCC, I apologise in case somebody corrects me. They did a lot of work with your reuse shops. So they've got like, not necessarily them. There are examples of community waste, wood reuse, there's paint reuse, there's repair drop-offs, there's little shops. The ones I can think of in Scotland off the top of my head, Stranraer's got one. They've got a reuse shop.
Uh-huh.
Edinburgh Council used to have some. I don't know if they're still on the go. So if anybody does have one and we've not given you a name shout, then shout. But that's, if we're thinking about how we move stuff up the waste hierarchy, that's where we need to be looking. We need to be looking at these HWRCs and saying, how can we get the valuable stuff? How can we get the good items? And it happens to a certain extent. So things like TVs will go to the likes of Restructor, and they will check them and see if they can repair it and sell it back on. The same as what we talked about. Gap with the fridges, they're good quality fridges, but generally by the time they've gone through an HWRC site, they're probably not in that good a condition and they'll probably not be reused. But that's where we need to get to with some of these things, that we need to start pushing it up the
yeah. So in terms of like we said, they've got high recycling rates because you can segregate, you can put things in different areas, glass and cardboard and wood and metals and all this sort of stuff. So they do have areas for recycling and recovery. So, 70-80% recycling is quite normal on a good site, as long as people aren't just chucking everything into the black bag.
The South Ayrshire Council site, which used to be run by Bar, it used to have a sign at the exit, and it used to give the weekly recycling rate from that site.
Excellent. I think quite a few of them do that, actually.
Yeah.
I've seen that before. So, they enable material separation. At curbside, you've got your glass, your paper, your card, and all that sort of stuff, but you haven't got a lot of the other things. And, they actually are able to separate the other things as well, preventing metals and electrical equipment and timber and all that sort of stuff from going to landfill sites. So, yeah, I think it's quite important. When you go there as well, you can actually see what's happening. You can see the recycling and the recovery. There's potentially to have bigger ones which have got more stuff that you can recycle in them, perhaps better traffic flows and all this sort of stuff. But again, it's all dependent on location, isn't it? Is it better to have lots of smaller ones that don't open very often, or one bigger one that's open all the time and you can actually come and go and get a really good service? Yeah, and I must admit it would be good to have these areas where your waste and your material that you're taking in can be reused and recycled, because a lot of the time you take your stuff and it may be that it still works.
It's waste. It's waste for you, but it's not waste for somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. It still works, but you just want a new one.
There you go. I think that's us done. I think the summary is the very, very, very valuable sites. I think from our experience, the staff are often undertrained, under-supported. Yes. They don't get as much attention as they should. I think there's probably scope, although the recycling rate's high. I think in some cases it could be higher, it could be better. And I think certainly I know from experience, some of the savings in terms of money and carbon can be made as in service in these sites, that they're a bit more efficient. Sometimes they're lifting empty skips from the site, or almost empty skips, because it's volume rather than weight. But certainly there's opportunities there. And I think by the time this one comes out, Jane, you'll have done 3 days training for a council in, I'm not going to say where, but you'll have done training in HWRCs for all operatives. I
will have done 3 days. It's good because obviously they see the benefit of training their staff. So I think I've got 3 days, and I'm probably
you'll have all the stories. We'll maybe need to do a part 2 with all the stories.
About 30 odd members of staff that are going through that training course, which is excellent. Yeah. Hopefully they'll enjoy it. Well, they will have enjoyed it, absolutely.
Good, perfect. And then just to finish off, I decided I was having a
Oh, you're on a rant.
And it goes back to the very start. It goes back to the waste crime report, the House of Lords report, which is, I think, what's often forgotten about waste crime is the waste sector is as big a victim of waste crime as anybody else, because the waste sector has got to compete against the criminal element, who can often do it much, much cheaper. And when I was going through that report, what was quite interesting, I think, was, the House of Lords really focused on, the regulator. It was particularly for the EA, it was particularly England focused, but the same principle applies in Scotland. But at the end of the day, the people that are driving that crime are the people that are using these low-cost operators. So often that'll be legitimate business who are focusing on lowest cost option rather than doing that due diligence and making sure the operator they are using is a reputable operator. So that was it wasn't quite a rant, it was more just a...
But I think that's what the operators who are operating legally, it just gets them pretty upset about is regulators might come in and go on and on about little things, and they're thinking, yeah, but I'm paying the right, I'm doing the right thing, I'm operating legally, I've got all my ticks in place, and down the road, down there, somebody's chucking it in a field. How can that be right?
Well, I'm not going to mention names yet, but I do have a barrister who is very keen to have a chat about this subject on Rubbish Talk. So you never know, in the next few episodes, we will have one on the legal side, the barrister. A view from a barrister, if we call it that. That's what we'll call it, eh?
Yeah.
And if we're really organised, Jane, we would know what we're talking about next week, but we're not that organised. So
no, sorry, guys.
We'll need to keep you all waiting.
That's right. It's always a mystery.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you again next Thursday at 4 p.m. Don't forget to follow, share with friends, and send us your feedback at hello@rubbishtalk.co.uk.